The conference room door clicked shut 6 inches from my face. Through the frosted glass, I could see my father's silhouette taking his seat at the head of the table, my mother beside him, and 8 other figures arranging themselves around what they clearly believed was the center of power at Meridian Industries. Miss Chin. The executive assistant Jennifer looked mortified. I'm so sorry. I didn't realize you weren't invited to the strategy session. Your parents specifically said. It's fine, Jennifer. Really? I adjusted my laptop bag and headed back toward the elevator. I have plenty of other work to handle. She followed me, her heels clicking anxiously on the marble floor. But you're always so involved in the quarterly reports. I just assumed you'd be in there with the senior leadership team. I pressed the elevator button, keeping my expression neutral. My parents have their reasons for handling things the way they do. What I didn't say was that I'd been expecting this for weeks. Ever since my father had returned from his medical leave 3 months ago, he'd been systematically shutting me out of every major business discussion. Strategy meetings, budget planning sessions, client presentations, anything that mattered was suddenly for qualified executives only, and my title as financial analyst too apparently didn't qualify. The elevator arrived and I stepped inside. My reflection stared back at me from the polished metal doors. 29 years old, wearing a sensible gray suit from Target, minimal makeup, hair in a simple ponytail. I looked exactly like what my parents saw when they looked at me. A competent but unremarkable employee who'd been given her position more out of family obligation than actual merit. They had no idea what they'd just done. My phone buzzed as the elevator descended. A message from Robert Mitchell, the company's chief financial officer. Alex, are you available for a quick call? Urgent matter. I waited until I reached the parking garage before calling him back. Robert had been CFO for 6 years, hired by my grandfather before he passed. He was one of 3 people in the entire company who knew the truth about Meridian's ownership structure. Alex. His voice was tight with stress. Please tell me you're aware of what's happening in that boardroom right now. I'm aware my parents locked me out of the strategy meeting, if that's what you mean. They're planning to announce a complete operational restructuring. New client acquisition targets, revised revenue projections, elimination of our small business division, and, this is the critical part, they want to authorize $180 million in debt financing to fund an expansion into luxury commercial development. I unlocked my car but didn't get in yet. They can't authorize debt financing of that scale without majority shareholder approval. I know that. You know that. But your parents seem to have convinced themselves that as co-founders and co-CEOs, they have unilateral authority over major business decisions. He paused. Alex, they're planning to present this restructuring as approved family business and put it to a board vote in approximately 45 minutes. And the board members? Most of them are longtime associates of your parents. They'll vote however James and Linda want them to vote. The only dissenting voices will be myself, Patricia Wong from Operations, and possibly David Hernandez from Legal. We'll be outvoted 7-3. I slid into my driver's seat, leaving the door open. What happens if the board approves the restructuring? They'll move immediately to implementation. By end of business today, they'll have signed preliminary agreements with 3 different lending institutions. By Monday, they'll announce the small business division closure to staff. By next Friday, approximately 47 employees will be laid off, and we'll have legally committed to $180 million in debt that our current revenue model cannot support. The small business division. I'd been working closely with that team for the last 18 months, ever since I'd transferred from the main accounting department. We provided affordable commercial space and business consulting to startups and family-owned companies, exactly the kind of unglamorous, low-margin work my parents had always viewed as a distraction from serious business. It was also the division that had generated a 23% increase in tenant retention and positive cash flow for 12 consecutive quarters. Robert, I need you to do something for me. Name it. In exactly 30 minutes, I want you to send a message to every phone in that boardroom. Make it look like an urgent compliance alert from the legal department. The message should read, immediate attention required. All corporate actions requiring shareholder approval must have documented consent from majority ownership per Section 7.3 of corporate bylaws and state corporate law. Failure to obtain proper authorization may result in invalidation of board decisions and personal liability for board members. That's going to cause chaos. That's the point. I'll be there in 25 minutes. Alex, are you sure about this? Once you reveal your position, there's no going back. Your parents are going to. I know exactly what they're going to do, Robert. But they've left me no choice. I hung up and sat in the quiet of my car for a moment, gathering my thoughts. What I was about to do would destroy my relationship with my parents, at least temporarily. It would expose a secret I'd been keeping for 3 years. It would force me to step into a role I'd been carefully avoiding while I learned every detail of the business from the inside. But it would also save 47 jobs, protect the small business division I'd helped build, and prevent my parents from leveraging the company into a debt position that could eventually destroy everything my grandfather had created. I pulled out of the parking garage and headed not back to the office but to my apartment 20 minutes away. I needed to change clothes, gather specific documents, and mentally prepare for what was about to happen. 3 years ago, my grandfather had called me into his study 2 weeks before he died. Cancer had ravaged his body, but his mind remained sharp until the very end. Alexandra, he'd said, using my full name the way he only did for serious conversations. I need to tell you something about your inheritance, and I need you to listen very carefully without interrupting. I'd sat across from him, watching the afternoon light filter through the windows of the house where I'd spent so many childhood summers. Your parents are excellent at what they do: client relations, public presentation, strategic networking. Your father has a gift for identifying emerging market trends, and your mother knows how to build relationships with high-value clients. They've grown Meridian from a mid-sized regional firm into a major player in commercial real estate development. He'd paused, his breathing labored. But they don't understand the foundation. They see the company as a vehicle for growth and profit, which isn't wrong, but it's incomplete. Meridian succeeds because we build lasting relationships, because we support businesses at every level, because we value stability over speculation. I understand, Grandpa. Your parents are going to want to transform Meridian into something flashier, more aggressive. And in the short term, that might generate impressive returns. But in the long term, it will compromise everything we've built. He'd looked at me with an intensity that was almost painful. That's why I'm transferring controlling interest to you. I'd been 26 years old, working as a junior accountant in Meridian's finance department, living in a modest apartment and driving a 12-year-old Subaru. The idea of controlling a company worth over $600 million had seemed absurd. You're not ready yet, he'd continued, reading my thoughts. That's why the transfer doesn't activate until your 30th birthday, and that's why it's structured through a private trust that keeps your ownership invisible until you choose to reveal it. Spend these years learning the business properly. Work in every department. Understand how each decision affects everyone from the senior executives down to the maintenance staff. What about Mom and Dad? They'll each receive 20%. Together they'll have enough to feel like significant stakeholders, but not enough to make unilateral decisions that could damage the company. He'd smiled slightly. They're going to be angry when they eventually find out. They'll feel betrayed, overlooked, punished. But this isn't about punishment, Alexandra. It's about protection. Does anyone else know? Robert Mitchell knows. He needs to for financial compliance. My attorney knows. The trustee knows. And on your 30th birthday, you'll receive documentation making it official. Until then, tell no one. Not your parents, not your friends, not anyone you date. Learn this business inside and out, and when the time comes that you need to exercise your authority, you'll be ready. That conversation had happened 37 months ago. My 30th birthday had been 7 months ago. And for 7 months I'd kept working as financial analyst too in the small business division, driving my now 15-year-old Subaru, living in my modest apartment, and watching my parents slowly build toward exactly the kind of aggressive expansion my grandfather had warned about. I'd been hoping they'd make different choices. I'd been hoping my father's health scare would remind them about sustainable growth and long-term stability. I'd been hoping I wouldn't have to do what I was about to do. But hope wasn't a business strategy. I changed into the one expensive suit I owned, a charcoal gray Armani I'd purchased specifically for this possibility and never worn. I pulled my hair into a professional twist, applied makeup more carefully than usual, and traded my practical flats for heels that added 3 inches to my height. The woman looking back at me from the mirror wasn't entry-level staff anymore. I gathered the leather portfolio Robert had prepared months ago. Every document related to my ownership position, every corporate filing, every trust agreement, and every legal opinion confirming my authority. Then I called my attorney Marcus Webb. Alexandra. Is this the call I've been anticipating? It is. I need you to meet me at Meridian Industries in 15 minutes. Consider it done. I've had these documents ready for 7 months. Do your parents have any idea? None whatsoever. This is going to be quite a shock. That's an understatement. I grabbed my keys and headed for the door. Marcus, I need you to be prepared for them to challenge everything. My competence, my authority, my intentions. My father is going to claim I'm too inexperienced for this level of responsibility. My mother is going to say I'm being emotionally manipulative. They're going to make this personal. And you? I'm going to stay professional, cite corporate bylaws and state law, and make it clear that I'm not seeking their approval or their understanding. I'm exercising legal authority that was transferred to me by the company's founder and upheld by every relevant legal entity. That's exactly the right approach. I'll see you soon. The drive back to Meridian took 18 minutes. I used the time to review the key points I needed to communicate: the legal structure of my ownership, the specific corporate actions that required my approval, and the alternative strategy I'd been developing for the last 6 months. Because I wasn't just stopping my parents' restructuring plan. I was replacing it with something better. I arrived at Meridian at 2:47 p.m. The strategy meeting had been scheduled to run from 2 to 4 o'clock, which meant my parents were likely in the middle of their presentation right now. Robert's compliance message would have gone out exactly 12 minutes ago. Marcus was waiting in the lobby, a slim leather briefcase in hand. Ready as I'll ever be. We took the elevator to the executive floor. Jennifer looked up from her desk, her eyes widening when she saw me in my transformed appearance. Miss Chin? I didn't expect to see you back. I need to interrupt the strategy meeting, Jennifer. I'm not sure that's. Your parents were very clear that they didn't want disruptions. Marcus stepped forward smoothly. This is a matter of corporate compliance and legal necessity. Ms. Chin has authority to interrupt this meeting under Section 7.3 of Meridian Industries corporate bylaws. Jennifer looked between us, clearly uncertain. Before she could respond, the conference room door opened and Robert emerged, his expression carefully neutral. Alexandra. Perfect timing. The board has just received some information that requires your immediate input. Through the open door I could see my parents at the front of the room, both of them holding their phones and looking confused. The other board members were similarly distracted, several of them typing rapidly on their devices. What's going on? My mother was saying. Who sent this message? Robert, is this from your department? In a manner of speaking, yes. Robert stepped aside, gesturing for me to enter. Ms. Chin is here to address the compliance concern. I walked into the conference room, Marcus beside me, and the conversations died immediately. My father stared at me, his confusion shifting rapidly to irritation. Alexandra, this isn't a good time. We're in the middle of a critical strategy discussion. I'm aware. I'm here because that strategy discussion includes corporate actions that require majority shareholder approval, which you don't have. My mother set down her phone. Sweetheart, I don't know what you've been told, but this is really a matter for senior leadership. I'm not here as senior leadership, Mom. I'm here as the majority shareholder of Meridian Industries. The silence that followed was absolute. My father's face went through several expressions: confusion, disbelief, and finally a condescending smile. Alexandra, I don't know where you got that idea, but your mother and I are the co-founders and co-owners of this company. We each hold 50%. No, Dad. You don't. I set my portfolio on the table and opened it, distributing packets to each board member. What you're receiving is complete documentation of Meridian Industries' ownership structure as established by Robert Chen's will and upheld through the Chen Family Trust. Marcus stepped forward, his voice carrying the weight of legal authority. My name is Marcus Webb, Corporate Counsel for the Chen Family Trust. I'm here to clarify the actual ownership distribution of Meridian Industries, which appears to have been misunderstood by certain parties. One of the board members, a man named Thomas who'd been my father's friend for 20 years, opened his packet. This says, 58% to Alexandra Chin? That's correct, Marcus confirmed. Robert Chin, founder of Meridian Industries, established a family trust in 2019 that would transfer controlling interest to his granddaughter Alexandra upon her 30th birthday, which occurred 7 months ago. James and Linda Chin each hold 20%, with the remaining 2% distributed between minor family members in educational trusts. My mother had gone very pale. That's not possible. Dad would have told us. He did tell you, Mom. He revised his will 4 years before he died, and you were both present when the attorney explained the trust structure. You chose not to take it seriously because you assumed I'd never exercise my authority, or that you could convince me to sign proxy agreements that would give you effective control. My father's hands were gripping the edge of the table. This is absurd. You're a financial analyst. You have no executive experience, no leadership background. I have 3 years of intensive operational experience working in 5 different departments of this company, I said calmly. I've worked in accounting, operations, client services, property management, and for the last 18 months, I've been embedded in the small business division, the same division you're planning to eliminate in today's restructuring announcement. Alexandra, you need to understand the bigger picture. I understand it perfectly, Dad. You want to eliminate our small business division because it generates lower profit margins than luxury commercial development. You want to authorize $180 million in debt financing to fund an aggressive expansion. And you want to shift our entire business model toward high-value clients and speculative development projects. I pulled out my tablet, connecting it to the conference room display. Here's what you're not seeing. The small business division has a 91% tenant retention rate compared to 73% in our luxury commercial division. It generates consistent positive cash flow with minimal risk exposure. And over the last 18 months, it's become a feeder system. 42% of our small business clients eventually expand into our larger commercial properties as they grow. The board members were leaning forward, studying the data on the screen. More importantly, I continued, the $180 million debt financing you're proposing would leverage us at 2.8 times our annual revenue, which is significantly above the 2.0 industry standard for sustainable growth. Based on market projections and our current absorption rates, we'd need to increase annual revenue by 33% just to service the debt, which means if we hit any market downturn or face any unexpected vacancies, we'd be in immediate financial distress. Patricia Wong, the operations director, spoke up. Alexandra, this analysis is extremely thorough. How long have you been working on this? 6 months. Since I first heard my parents discussing the expansion strategy. I switched to the next slide. Here's my alternative proposal. Instead of eliminating the small business division, we expanded into 2 additional markets where we've identified strong demand. Total capital requirement is $23 million, which we can fund through existing cash reserves without taking on additional debt. Projected revenue increase is conservative, 8 to 12% over 3 years, but it's stable, scalable, and aligned with our core competency. Robert was nodding slowly, his expression carefully neutral but his eyes showing clear approval. My father stood up abruptly. This is ridiculous. You're my daughter, not a corporate strategist. You've been working in entry-level positions because you needed experience, not because you were qualified to make major business decisions. James. Marcus's voice was quiet but firm. With respect, Ms. Chen's qualifications are irrelevant to the legal reality. She holds 58% of Meridian Industries. That's not subject to debate or interpretation. Any major corporate action requires her written consent, and based on the documentation we've reviewed, the restructuring you're proposing definitely qualifies as a major corporate action. My mother had found her voice again and her tone was sharper now. You don't have the experience to understand what you're doing, Alexandra. You're going to destroy everything your father and I have built. Grandpa built this company, Mom. You and Dad grew it, which I respect, but you didn't build the foundation. I looked around the room at the board members. Robert Chin started Meridian in 1989 with a single office building and a philosophy that sustainable growth matters more than spectacular growth. For 34 years that philosophy worked. We survived the 2008 financial crisis because we weren't over-leveraged. We thrived during economic uncertainty because our tenant relationships were strong enough to weather market volatility. Thomas cleared his throat. James, Linda, I think we need to take a step back here. Regardless of how anyone feels about the ownership structure, the legal reality is clear. If Alexandra holds controlling interest, we cannot proceed with major corporate actions without her approval. She's 29 years old, my father snapped. She has no idea what she's doing. I'm 30, Dad. And I've been preparing for this responsibility for exactly as long as Grandpa instructed me to. I closed my portfolio and looked at him directly. I know you're angry. I know you feel like Grandpa betrayed you or that I've been conspiring behind your back. But this isn't about betrayal. It's about protecting a company that supports 237 employees and their families, maintains relationships with over 300 business tenants, and generates stable returns for all shareholders. You have no right. I have every right. Legally, ethically, and morally. I turned back to the board. I'm formally denying approval for the proposed restructuring as presented. The small business division will not be eliminated, the $180 million debt financing will not be pursued, and no employment terminations will occur as part of this strategy revision. David Hernandez, the legal director, spoke up. Ms. Chen, as majority shareholder, you have authority to deny board proposals, but you also have a fiduciary duty to act in the best interests of all shareholders. Your parents still hold 40% combined. Do you have an alternative strategy that addresses their concerns about growth and market positioning? I do. I pulled up a different presentation. This is a 5-year strategic plan I've been developing with input from department heads across operations, finance, and business development. It maintains our small business division while also pursuing targeted growth in medical office properties and professional services space, 2 sectors with strong fundamentals and lower volatility than luxury residential conversion. For the next 20 minutes, I walked through the analysis. Market research, financial projections, risk assessments, implementation timelines. I'd been working on this plan for 6 months, quietly coordinating with managers who believed I was just a financial analyst doing extra research, never realizing I was actually preparing to exercise controlling shareholder authority. By the time I finished, several board members were nodding. Thomas was taking notes. Patricia was asking detailed questions about the operational requirements. My parents sat in silence, my father's face still flushed with anger, my mother's expression unreadable. Finally, Robert spoke. Ms. Chen, speaking as CFO, I believe this alternative strategy is financially sound, operationally feasible, and significantly less risky than the high-leverage approach we were considering. I recommend the board formally review this proposal for approval at our next scheduled meeting. I second that recommendation, Patricia said immediately. David nodded. Agreed. This requires proper due diligence, but the preliminary analysis is impressive. My father pushed back from the table. I need to speak with my daughter. Privately. James, I don't think, Robert began. Now, my father said, his voice tight. I looked at Marcus, who gave me a slight nod. I'll be in the hall, he said quietly. My parents and I walked to my father's office in silence. The moment the door closed, he turned on me. How could you do this? After everything we've done for you, after we gave you a position at this company? You gave me an entry-level position and consistently blocked me from any real responsibility, I said calmly. Every time I tried to contribute to strategic discussions, you dismissed it as inexperience. Every time I presented analysis, you told me to focus on my assigned duties. You've spent 3 years treating me like I'm here because of family obligation, not because I have anything valuable to offer. My mother's voice was cold. You conspired with your grandfather to steal control of our company. Grandpa gave me responsibility for protecting his legacy. That's not the same as stealing. I met her eyes steadily. And it's not your company, Mom. It was never entirely your company. You and Dad were always managing it as stewards, not absolute owners. Grandpa just made that structure explicit in his will. You're not qualified for this, my father said. You're going to make decisions that damage the business. Like refusing to leverage us into $180 million of debt that could destroy the company if the market shifts. Like protecting a profitable division that you wanted to eliminate because it doesn't fit your vision of what success looks like. The small business division is a distraction. The small business division is our foundation. I kept my voice level, but I could feel the emotion underneath. It's where we build relationships with growing companies. It's where we prove that we're not just another corporate landlord extracting maximum rent. It's what makes Meridian different from every other commercial real estate firm in this market. My mother shook her head. You're being naive. Business isn't about relationships and philosophy. Business is exactly about relationships when you're in commercial real estate, Mom. Our tenant retention rate is our competitive advantage. Our reputation for supporting growing businesses is why we can maintain 93% occupancy even in economic downturns. Grandpa understood that. I understand that. And if you were honest with yourselves, you'd understand it too. My father sat down heavily in his desk chair. So what happens now? You're going to vote against everything we propose? Turn us into figureheads in our own company? That depends entirely on you. I stayed standing. If you're willing to work with me, to actually listen to analysis and consider alternatives instead of dismissing input that doesn't come from your network of executive friends, then we can continue as partners. You bring your expertise in client relations and market positioning, I bring strategic planning and operational analysis, and together we make decisions that benefit all stakeholders. And if we're not willing to work under those conditions? My mother asked coldly. Then you can cash out your 40% and find another company to run. Meridian will be fine either way. I headed toward the door then paused. I don't want that for what it's worth. I'd prefer to work with you. But I'm not going to let you destroy what Grandpa built just because you're angry about ownership structure you should have taken seriously 4 years ago. I walked out before either of them could respond. Marcus was waiting in the hallway exactly where he'd promised. How did that go? About as well as expected. They're furious, hurt, and convinced I'm going to ruin everything. I rubbed my temples. This is going to be complicated for a while. Change usually is. He fell into step beside me as we headed toward the elevator. For what it's worth, that presentation you gave was exceptional. Your grandfather would be proud. I hope so. We stepped into the elevator and I finally allowed myself to acknowledge how exhausted I felt. Marcus, what happens next? Legally, I mean. The board will schedule a formal review of your strategic proposal, likely within 2 weeks. Your parents have the right to present counter-proposals, which they almost certainly will. If they decide they can't work within the ownership structure, they can pursue a buyout of their combined 40%, but that would require you to either purchase their shares directly or find outside investors willing to buy in as minority shareholders. What's 40% of Meridian worth? Approximately $240 million at current valuation. I whistled softly. That's going to be an interesting conversation. My phone buzzed. A message from Robert. Small Business Division wants to thank you. They heard rumors of restructuring and were terrified. Can I tell them their division is safe? I typed back, yes. And let's schedule a meeting with the division heads tomorrow. I want to hear directly from them about growth opportunities. The elevator reached the parking garage. Marcus walked me to my 15-year-old Subaru, which looked ridiculous next to the Mercedes and BMWs surrounding it. You know, he said, you might want to consider an upgrade eventually. Majority shareholders typically maintain certain appearances. I looked at my reliable, slightly dented car and smiled. Maybe. But this Subaru has gotten me through 3 years of learning this business from the ground up. It feels wrong to abandon it just because my title changed. Your grandfather drove a 10-year-old pickup truck until the day he died, Marcus pointed out. I think he'd understand. I drove home slowly, my mind processing everything that had happened. In the space of 2 hours, I'd revealed a secret I'd kept for 3 years, challenged my parents' authority in front of the entire board, presented an alternative strategic plan I'd been developing in secret, and fundamentally altered my relationship with the 2 people who'd raised me. My phone rang. My mother's number. I considered not answering, then decided that avoidance wouldn't help anyone. Hi, Mom. Your father and I need time to process this. Her voice was strained but more controlled than it had been in the office. We're not ready to discuss business partnership or strategic collaboration yet. I understand. But we're also not ready to cash out and walk away. She paused. Your grandfather trusted you with this responsibility for a reason. I may not agree with his decision, but I respected him too much to ignore it completely. So we're going to review your strategic proposal properly, and we're going to see if we can find a way to work together. Thank you, Mom. That's all I'm asking. Don't thank me yet. We're still furious, Alexandra. And this is going to take a long time to work through. I know. After she hung up, I sat in my apartment parking lot for several minutes, emotionally drained but also feeling something unexpected: relief. For 3 years I'd carried the weight of this secret. For 3 years, I'd watched my parents make decisions I disagreed with while staying silent, learning, waiting for the moment when I'd need to exercise my authority. For 3 years I'd been living a double life: entry-level analyst on the surface, controlling shareholder underneath. Now the truth was out. My parents knew. The board knew. And tomorrow the entire company would know. Everything was about to change. I grabbed my laptop bag and headed into my modest apartment, the place I'd chosen specifically because it was close to several of Meridian's properties and I wanted to understand the neighborhoods where we operated. Eventually I'd probably need to move somewhere that matched my actual financial position. Eventually I'd need to upgrade my wardrobe beyond one expensive suit. Eventually I'd need to look like what I actually was. But not today. Today I'd saved 47 jobs, protected a division I believed in, and honored my grandfather's trust in me. That was enough. I changed out of my Armani suit and back into comfortable jeans and a sweatshirt. Then I opened my laptop and started drafting talking points for tomorrow's meeting with the small business division heads. Because the real work was just beginning. My grandfather had given me controlling interest in Meridian Industries. But control wasn't the same as leadership and ownership wasn't the same as authority. Those things had to be earned through competence, consistency, and care for everyone who depended on the company's success. I'd spent 3 years preparing for this moment. Now I had the rest of my career to prove I deserved it. My phone buzzed one more time. A message from Robert: board meeting scheduled for 2 weeks from today. Your parents' counterproposal will be presented then. Get ready for a fight. I smiled and typed back, I've been ready for 3 years. Outside my window, the city lights twinkled in the darkness. Somewhere out there, 47 employees were sleeping easier tonight because their jobs were secure. Somewhere out there, my parents were struggling with anger and betrayal and reluctant respect. Somewhere out there, small businesses that depended on Meridian's affordable commercial space would continue operating without disruption. And somewhere out there, my grandfather's legacy was safe for another generation. I closed my laptop and finally allowed myself to acknowledge the truth I'd been avoiding all day. I was terrified. Terrified of making mistakes, of disappointing people, of proving my parents right that I wasn't ready for this responsibility. Terrified that I'd misread the market or overlooked critical factors in my strategic planning. Terrified that protecting my grandfather's vision meant resisting necessary evolution. But fear wasn't a reason to retreat. My grandfather had trusted me with this responsibility, knowing I'd be afraid, knowing I'd face opposition, knowing the path ahead would be difficult. He trusted me anyway. That had to be enough. I turned off the lights and headed to bed, already mentally preparing for tomorrow's challenges. The board would scrutinize every detail of my proposal. My parents would present counterarguments designed to make me look naive and inexperienced. Employees would watch to see if I could actually lead or if I'd crumble under pressure. But I'd been preparing for this for 3 years. I knew Meridian's operations better than anyone except possibly Robert. I understood our tenants, our market position, our competitive advantages, and our vulnerabilities. I wasn't entry-level staff anymore. I was the majority shareholder of a $600 million company, and I was going to prove that my grandfather's faith in me wasn't misplaced. Starting tomorrow,